The clock on the wall of Thornfield Manor had just struck midnight when Lord Edmund Ashford slammed his palm flat on the mahogany desk and looked his solicitor dead in the eye. "I need a bride by tomorrow," he said. "Before noon." Mr. Fenwick did not blink right away. He was a thin man of 60, with gray hair combed too carefully and a face that had seen 30 years of aristocratic trouble. He had been sitting across from Edmund for the past 2 hours, going through papers, figures, and legal clauses that all pointed to the same terrible conclusion. But hearing those words out loud was still a shock. "Your Grace," Fenwick said carefully, "what you are describing is not legally possible in any conventional sense." "I did not ask you what was conventional," Edmund said. "I asked you to find me a solution." Fenwick set down his pen. Outside the tall windows, a cold October wind was moving through the oak trees that lined the long driveway. The estate was quiet now. The funeral guests had gone home hours ago. The flowers were still in the entrance hall, white and wilting. His father had been buried that morning, and Edmund had not slept in 2 days. His eyes were dry and dark-rimmed, and his jaw was set the way it always was when he had already made up his mind about something and simply needed the world to cooperate. The will had been read that afternoon. It had been written by Edmund's father, the previous Duke of Wexmoor, 7 years ago, during a period when the old man had been consumed by fear about the family legacy. He had never trusted Edmund to settle down. He had said so openly, more than once, at dinner, in correspondence, and in quiet conversations that Edmund had walked away from before they could become arguments. The old Duke had believed that a man without a wife was a man without an anchor, and so he had buried a clause deep inside his will, tucked between the management of the northern farmlands and the list of charitable endowments. If the heir had not taken a wife within 30 days of inheriting the title, the Wexmoor estate and its holdings would pass entirely to the next in line. That was Lord Percival Ashford, Edmund's cousin. Edmund had known about the clause for years. He had treated it the way a person treats a loose stone on a familiar path. He knew it was there. He stepped around it every day without thinking. And then one morning he caught his foot on it and went down hard. He had spent 29 of his 30 days doing nothing, not because he was careless or foolish. He had simply not believed, until his father was actually gone, that the old man had truly meant it. Surely there was a way around it. Surely Fenwick would find a loophole. Surely the courts would see reason. But there was no loophole. The will was iron. And tomorrow was day 30. "If Lord Percival files his claim and you are unmarried," Fenwick said, "he has every legal right under the terms of this will. The estate, the titles, properties, the investments, all of it." "I know what it means," Edmund said. "Then you understand that what you are asking me to arrange in the next 12 hours is possible," Edmund said. "Find me a woman who is unmarried, of reasonable birth, and willing to sign a legal agreement. The terms will be fair. The arrangement will be temporary. I will not waste her time or mine pretending otherwise. This is a business arrangement, Fenwick. I need someone sensible enough to understand that." Fenwick looked at his employer for a long moment. He had known Edmund since the boy was 12 years old. He had watched him grow into a man who was not unkind, but who had built walls so high and so well that most people simply stopped trying to look over them. He had also watched him manage the estate's finances with cold precision after the old Duke's health began to fail. Watched him make every difficult decision that needed making. Watched him grieve in private and in silence, the way men of his upbringing were taught to grieve. And now here he was, asking for the impossible. Fenwick thought for several minutes. He thought about every family he knew, every unmarried woman of suitable birth, every widow, every quiet daughter in every county house within a 20-mile radius. And he kept arriving at the same problem. There was no time. Not for a proper introduction, not for a courtship, however brief, not for consent that was freely given rather than pressured. And Edmund, to his credit, had said nothing about pressure. He wanted someone willing. That was the word he had used. Then Fenwick thought of something else. He thought about Lady Harrington's estate, where he had attended a small gathering 3 weeks ago. He thought about the back corridor of that house, and a young woman he had passed without much thought, carrying a basket of fabric samples. He had heard someone call her name. He had heard, also, in conversation later that evening, that she was the daughter of a disgraced gentleman, that she was unmarried, that she was clever, that she had survived on her own skills for several years and asked nobody for anything. He stood up slowly. "Give me an hour," he said. Edmund looked up. "Where are you going?" "To see if there is a solution," Fenwick said. "One that might actually work." He left before Edmund could argue. The night was cold and the road was uneven, but Fenwick had his driver push the horses hard. He arrived at Lady Harrington's estate in 40 minutes. The main house was dark except for a single light in a downstairs window. He knocked at the servants' entrance, and a sleepy footman answered, and after some persuasion and the mention of the Duke's name, Fenwick was shown to a small sitting room near the kitchens. He waited. 10 minutes later, Clara Voss came through the door. She was not what most people would call remarkable at first glance. She was of average height, with brown hair that was neatly pinned despite the late hour, and dark eyes that were wide awake in a way that suggested she had not been sleeping. She was wearing a plain gray dress. She was carrying nothing. She stood in the doorway and looked at Fenwick with an expression that was neither frightened nor particularly welcoming. "Mr. Fenwick," she said, "it is past 1 in the morning." "I am aware, Miss Voss. Please sit down. I have something to discuss with you that cannot wait." She sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She waited. Fenwick laid out the facts as clearly and as quickly as he could. He told her about the will. He told her about the 30-day clause. He told her about Lord Percival, and what it would mean for the estate, and for everyone connected to it, if Percival took control. He told her that the Duke needed a wife by noon the next day. He told her that the arrangement would be temporary, a marriage in name, a legal agreement, a fair sum of money at the end, and a passage to wherever she wished to go. Clara listened without interrupting. When Fenwick finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What is the sum?" Fenwick told her. She did not react. She simply nodded once, as if she had already done the mathematics in her head and arrived at the same number he had. "And the Duke," she said. "What kind of man is he?" "He is not cruel," Fenwick said carefully. "He is not given to temper or to meanness. He is demanding. He can be cold. He is not accustomed to being told no. But he is also fair, and he keeps his word. I have known him for 20 years, and I have never seen him break a promise he made in good faith." Clara looked at the small fire in the grate for a moment. "You said the arrangement would be a business agreement," she said. "That is how the Duke described it, yes." "Then before I agree to anything," she said, "I want to speak to the Duke himself." Fenwick blinked. "Tonight?" "Yes," she said, "tonight. Because if we are going to talk about business, I want to hear it from the man I would be doing business with, not from his representative." Fenwick looked at her for a moment. He had expected many responses. He had prepared for tears, for outrage, for greed, for fear. He had not prepared for this. He had not prepared for a young woman sitting with perfect composure in a kitchen sitting room at 1 in the morning, asking, without any drama whatsoever, to meet the Duke. He stood up. "Then come with me," he said. Clara stood up. She took a moment to straighten her dress. She did not ask for her coat, though the night was cold. She walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. "One more thing," she said. "Yes?" "If I decide no," she said, "we never had this conversation." Fenwick nodded. "Of course." They went out into the night. The carriage ride back to Wexmore Hall was quiet. Clara sat with her hands in her lap and looked out the window at the dark fields moving past. Fenwick watched her without appearing to watch her. He was trying to figure out what she was thinking, and he could not. That, he thought, was probably a good sign. When the carriage turned through the iron gates of Wexmore Hall, Clara leaned forward slightly and looked up at the house. It was large and gray and old, with tall chimneys and dozens of windows, most of them dark. There was a light in one second-floor room and a light in what appeared to be a downstairs study. The gravel drive was lined with old trees, their bare branches crossing overhead like a roof. "Is it always this quiet?" she asked. "It has been quiet since the old Duke fell ill," Fenwick said. "There used to be more staff, more activity, but things have been managed carefully for some years now." She nodded and said nothing else. They went inside. A night footman took their coats. Fenwick led Clara down a long corridor hung with portraits that stared down from the walls with various expressions of nobility and disapproval. She did not look at them. She kept her eyes forward. Fenwick knocked on the study door. "Come in," said a voice from inside. The study was warm. There were books everywhere, on shelves, on the desk, in stacks on the floor near the window. A fire was burning in the grate. The desk was covered in papers. And behind the desk, standing rather than sitting, was Edmund Ashford, the Duke of Wexmore. He was taller than Clara had imagined. He was also younger than she had expected, which surprised her. She had pictured someone older, more like Fenwick, heavy with years and weight. But this man was perhaps 32 or 33, with dark hair that was slightly disordered, as if he had been running his hand through it, and eyes that were very dark and very tired, and very sharp all at the same time. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Your Grace," Fenwick said from behind her. "This is Miss Clara Voss." "I know who she is," Edmund said. "Fenwick told me before he left." He looked at Clara directly. He tells me you insisted on speaking with me personally before making any decision. That is correct, Clara said. Then sit down, he said, and tell me what you want to know. Clara sat. She did not look around the room, or at the books, or at anything except the man across the desk. I want to know the terms, she said. All of them. Not the version that makes this sound reasonable. The actual terms. Something moved in Edmund's expression. It was not quite surprise. It was more like the recognition of something he had not expected to find here. All right, he said. He pulled a chair from beside the desk and sat down himself, which made the conversation feel suddenly less like a negotiation and more like a genuine exchange between two people. The actual terms are these. He spoke for several minutes. He told her about the will. He told her about Percival and why it mattered. He told her that the marriage would be conducted legally and in full, with all the documentation in order, because anything less would give Percival grounds to challenge it. He told her that the annulment, when the time came, would also be clean and legal. He told her that she would have her own rooms, her own time, and her own money. He told her that he would not pretend to be something he was not, and he would not ask her to love him or to act as though she did in private. In public, they would need to be convincing. That was the one condition he was firm about. If people doubted the marriage, Percival would use that doubt. So in public they would be a couple, polite, reasonable, not performing happiness but performing enough of a partnership that no reasonable person could question it. When he finished, Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have conditions of my own. He looked at her steadily. Go on. I will not be treated as a piece of furniture, she said. Not in this house, not in company, not by the staff. I do not care what my position was before this arrangement. While I am your wife, I expect to be treated as your wife. That means basic respect. That means I am not ignored, dismissed, or spoken around as if I am not in the room. Agreed, he said. I keep my earnings, she said. Whatever I have saved, whatever I make in any capacity during this period, is mine. It does not become yours by virtue of this marriage. Agreed. The terms of the annulment are committed to in writing before the ceremony, she said. Not after. Before. Including the sum we discussed, and a clear timeline. Agreed. And I want it held by a solicitor I choose, not yours. There was a pause, a brief one. Then he nodded. Agreed. Clara looked at him for a moment. He had agreed to every condition without arguing, without negotiating, without trying to soften anything. She had expected at least some resistance. The absence of it made her more cautious, not less. One more thing, she said. Yes? If at any point during this arrangement I feel that the terms are being broken, she said, I walk away. No argument. No delay. I walk away, and whatever was agreed in writing is still paid in full. Edmund looked at her for a long moment. The fire crackled. Fenwick, standing near the door, was very still. If the terms are broken, Edmund said finally, you would be right to walk away. And I would not stop you. Clara nodded once. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up at him. Then I will do it, she said. The room was quiet. Fenwick let out a breath so quietly that neither of them heard it. Edmund stood up from his chair and went to the desk. He picked up a fresh sheet of paper. Then let us write it down, he said. All of it, tonight. Yes, Clara said, tonight. She did not feel afraid. That surprised her a little. She had expected fear, or at least uncertainty. But what she felt, sitting in that warm study with its stacks of books and its tired duke and its quietly relieved solicitor, was something much closer to clarity. She had walked into a strange situation with her eyes open. She had asked for what she needed. She had been given it. Whatever came next, she thought, at least it would be honest. They sat together at the desk until nearly 3 in the morning, going through every term, writing it out in careful plain language, crossing out anything that was vague and replacing it with something exact. Edmund wrote in a clear, quick hand. Clara read every sentence before she moved on to the next. Fenwick witnessed the final document and signed his name at the bottom. When it was done, Edmund set down his pen and looked at her. We will need to be at the chapel by 9, he said. The vicar is being contacted now. Then I should rest, Clara said. She stood up. She smoothed her dress. She looked at the document on the desk for a moment, then at him. Good night, Your Grace, she said. Good night, Miss Voss, he said. She followed Fenwick out of the study. She heard the door close behind her. She walked down the long corridor with its staring portraits and its cold stone floor, and she did not look back. In the morning, everything would change. She had known, walking in, that she could say no and walk away, and that would be the end of it. The fact that she had said yes was her own decision, made with full knowledge and full attention. Whatever the Duke of Wexmore was, she thought, he was not a liar. He had sat across from her at his own desk, at 2 in the morning, and agreed to every condition she had laid down, without flinching, without bargaining, without condescension. That was not nothing. That, in her experience, was actually quite rare. She found the room that Fenwick showed her and sat down on the edge of the bed without taking off her shoes. She looked at the ceiling for a long time. She thought about what she was walking into. She thought about what she was walking away from, the back rooms and the unpaid bills and the invisible life she had been living for 3 years. She thought about the Duke's tired dark eyes. She thought about the way he had said, "If the terms are broken, you would be right to walk away, and I would not stop you." She thought that was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. Then she lay back on top of the covers, and for the first time in a very long while, she slept without dreaming at all. The morning came gray and cold, the way mornings in that part of the country often did in October. The light through the window of the room where Clara had slept was thin and flat, without warmth. She was awake before it properly arrived, sitting up and already thinking, the way she had trained herself to do in the years since her father's death. She had never been a person who woke slowly. She had not had the luxury of it. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. It was a guest room, modest by the standards of the house, but larger than any room she had occupied in 3 years. There was a writing table by the window and a wardrobe and a small fireplace that had burned down to cold ash during the night. Someone had left a pitcher of water on the stand by the door. She washed her face and smoothed her hair back and put on the same gray dress she had been wearing the night before, because it was the only dress she had. She opened the door and found a young housemaid waiting in the corridor. The girl was perhaps 17, with red hair and careful eyes. She gave a small curtsy that seemed genuinely startled out of her, as if she had been expecting Clara and still could not quite believe she was real. "Good morning, miss," she said. "I am Nell. Mr. Fenwick asked me to see to you this morning." "Thank you, Nell," Clara said. "Is there somewhere I can have a cup of tea?" Nell blinked. She had clearly been prepared for more complicated requests. "Yes, miss, of course, right this way." She was taken to a small sitting room off the kitchen corridor, which was already warm from the kitchen fires. Tea was brought quickly. Bread and butter followed. Clara ate without being dramatic about it. She had been hungry before. She had been in uncertain situations before. Eating when food was available was a basic rule she had learned early and kept. While she ate, Fenwick came in. He looked as though he had not slept at all, which was probably true. His coat was fresh, but his eyes were not, and he carried a folder of papers under his arm that he set down on the table, with the careful reverence of someone handling something fragile. "The document from last night has been copied," he said. "1 copy for the Duke, 1 copy for you, and 1 copy will be held by Mr. Arthur Webb, a solicitor in the town of Marlton, as you requested." Clara looked up. "You arranged that already? It is barely 7 in the morning." "Mr. Webb was contacted by message writer at 4 this morning," Fenwick said without expression. "He has agreed to hold the document as an independent party. He is a man of complete integrity. I chose him specifically because he has never worked for the Duke and has no financial connection to this estate." Clara looked at him for a moment. "You did that on your own initiative. You made the condition," Fenwick said. "The condition was reasonable. It seemed only right to honor it properly." Clara picked up her cup. "Thank you, Mr. Fenwick." He nodded. He pulled out the second copy from the folder and placed it in front of her. She read it through again, slowly, as she had the night before. Every term was there. The language was clear. The annulment timeline was specific. The sum was written in full, not abbreviated. The clause about her personal earnings was explicit. She folded it and put it in the inside pocket of her dress. Fenwick cleared his throat. "The ceremony is at 9, he said. "That gives us just under 2 hours. Mrs. Potts, she is the housekeeper, has asked if you would like to use one of the late Duchess's dresses. There are several from some years ago that were never taken out of the wardrobe. She thought perhaps—" "No," Clara said. "Thank you. I will wear what I have." Fenwick paused. "Miss Voss, I understand the sentiment, but the vicar will be present, and there will be a witness from the county records office and—" "Mr. Fenwick," Clara said quietly but firmly, "I said no. I am not trying to make a statement. I simply do not wish to start this arrangement by wearing someone else's clothes. I will be clean and presentable, and that will be enough." Another small pause. Then he nodded. "Very well." He left her to finish her breakfast. She sat alone in the small sitting room for a while after, with her second cup of tea and the sound of the house beginning its morning routines around her. She could hear footsteps above and below. Someone was carrying coal down a back staircase. Someone was opening windows in a distant room. The whole house had a particular rhythm to it, the rhythm of a place that had been running on careful habit for years without much joy in it. She thought about the Duke. She had met him only once, in the middle of the night, across a desk covered in papers. She had not had time to form impressions beyond the ones she had gathered immediately, and the ones she had gathered immediately were these. He was tired. He was serious. He was not trying to charm her, and he had kept his word on every point she had raised. Those were 4 things. None of them were small. She had dealt with men who did not keep their word. She had dealt with men who were tired and made it everyone else's problem. She had dealt with men who were serious in the way that meant they did not think women had ideas worth listening to. The Duke had been serious in a different way, the way of a person who had a specific problem and needed a specific solution, and was paying attention to the details because the details mattered. He had not been warm. She had not expected warmth. What she had not expected was that he would be fair. At 8:30, Nell came back to walk her to the chapel. The chapel was inside the grounds of the estate, attached to the south side of the main house by a covered stone walkway. It was a small, very old building, with thick stone walls and narrow windows and wooden pews that had been worn smooth by generations of use. There were no flowers. The candles on the altar were white and plain. The vicar was already there, a stout older man with a pink face and a look of careful neutrality that suggested Fenwick had briefed him fully, and he had decided, wisely, to ask no questions. His name was Mr. Holt, and he shook Clara's hand with the polite firmness of a man who had conducted many services in this chapel, and intended to conduct many more, and was not about to be thrown by unusual circumstances. There were 2 witnesses. One was Fenwick. The other was a woman Clara had not met, introduced as Mrs. Lowe from the county records office, a small, neat woman who appeared entirely unsurprised by anything, which Clara found mildly reassuring. And then Edmund came in. He entered from a side door, and Clara turned to look at him. He was dressed formally, in a dark coat and a white shirt, and he had clearly slept at some point because the worst of the exhaustion was gone from his face, replaced with the kind of controlled composure that was clearly second nature to him. He looked at her when he entered, and she looked at him, and for a brief moment there was a kind of mutual, wordless assessment passing between them. He looked at her plain gray dress. He said nothing. She looked at his formal coat. She said nothing. They walked to the front of the chapel and stood side by side in front of Mr. Holt, who opened his book and began. The service was brief. It was not cold exactly, but it was very focused, the way a legal proceeding is focused, with precision and with weight, but without unnecessary performance. When Mr. Holt asked the questions, they answered. Edmund's voice was steady and low. Clara's voice was steady and clear. There was one moment, just one, when the words of the vow required Edmund to take her hand, and he did so with a formality that was almost careful, as if he was aware that it was unfamiliar for both of them, and was making a quiet effort not to make it strange. His hand was large and warm and dry. Hers was cool. They were both very still. Mr. Holt said the words that made it legal. Mrs. Lowe and Fenwick signed the register. Clara and Edmund signed the register. And then it was done. They stood for a moment in the quiet chapel. The candles flickered. Mr. Holt closed his book and gave a short congratulatory nod that managed to be both genuine and carefully non-committal at the same time. Fenwick looked quietly relieved. Mrs. Lowe was already writing something in her own official book. Clara became aware in the silence of that moment that she was now, by law, the Duchess of Wexmore. It was a very strange thought. Edmund turned to her. "We have a solicitors' meeting at 11, he said, "to file the marriage record and send official notice to the relevant parties." He paused. "Are you all right?" The question surprised her a little. Not the words themselves, but the way he asked it. There was no performance in it. No social script. He just asked it plainly, the way a person asks when they genuinely want to know. "Yes," she said, "I am all right." He nodded. "Then let us go in." They walked back through the covered walkway into the main house. The morning light had improved slightly. The flat gray had shifted to something softer. Nell was waiting near the entrance, and she gave Clara a look of such anxious hopefulness that Clara almost smiled. "Mrs. Potts has breakfast ready in the small dining room," Fenwick said from behind them. "For both of you." Clara glanced at Edmund. He glanced back at her. It was, she thought, the first time they had looked at each other as people who were going to have to share a dining room table. "All right," Edmund said. He gestured for her to go ahead. She went. The small dining room was exactly as it sounded, smaller than the formal dining room, with a round table and 4 chairs and a window that looked out onto the side garden. The fire was lit. The table was set for 2. There were eggs and toast and a pot of tea, and everything was warm and quiet and oddly normal. They sat down across from each other. For a moment, Neither of them said anything. The clinking of cutlery was very loud in the silence. Then Edmund said, "I did not ask you last night what brought you to Lady Harrington's household." Clara looked up. "No," she said. "You did not." He waited, which she noticed. He did not push. He simply left space for her to fill or not fill as she chose. She poured her tea. "My father lost everything when I was 17, she said. "We had a small estate in the north. He had debts I did not know about. When he died, there was nothing left. I came south because I had a skill that could earn me money, and I did not know anyone in the north who would help me." She paused. "Lady Harrington was the first employer who actually paid on time. That is why I stayed." Edmund listened. He did not offer sympathy, which she appreciated. He simply said, "You made something workable." "Yes," she said. "That is what you do." He nodded once and went back to his eggs. She looked at him for a moment across the table. He was eating in the manner of a man who had not eaten properly in several days, and was doing so now out of duty more than appetite. His coat was perfect. His posture was perfect. And behind all of that, she could see the tiredness still, sitting underneath everything like a watermark. She thought, this man has just buried his father, been told he might lose everything, agreed to marry a stranger in the middle of the night, and is now sitting across a breakfast table trying to have a polite conversation. She thought, he is doing remarkably well, all things considered. "I am sorry about your father," she said. He looked up. The words had clearly caught him off guard. "Thank you," he said, after a brief pause. She nodded and picked up her toast. They ate the rest of the meal in a silence that was not entirely uncomfortable, which was, Clara thought, probably the best that could be hoped for on the morning of a very strange and very sudden wedding. When they were done, Fenwick appeared at the door. "The carriage is ready, Your Grace, and Your Grace." He stumbled slightly on the second title, as if he was still getting used to saying it. Clara stood up. She straightened her dress. She was still in the same plain gray cloth she had been wearing since the night before, and she was acutely aware that she had nothing else to wear, that everything she owned was still at Lady Harrington's estate in a small box under a spare bed. "I will need to collect my things," she said. "From Lady Harrington's." "Of course," Edmund said. "We can arrange that today." She nodded. She picked up the empty teacup and for a moment did not know what to do with it, which was a very strange feeling for someone who had been working in other people's houses for years. She set it down again. Edmund had already moved toward the door. He stopped in the doorway and turned back. "You will need to meet the household staff at some point today," he said. "There are 14 of them currently. Mrs. Potts will introduce you if you would like, or I can do it." Clara thought about this. "You can do it," she said. "It will send a clearer message coming from you." He looked at her for a moment. There it was again, that look of quiet recognition, as if she had said something he found unexpectedly sensible. "Yes," he said. "All right." They left the dining room together, two strangers who were now legally and entirely the most important people in each other's lives, walking side by side through the corridors of a house that neither of them had chosen, and both of them now had to inhabit. Outside, the morning had turned a little brighter. A bird was calling somewhere in the oak trees at the end of the drive. Clara kept her eyes forward. She was the Duchess of Wexmore. She was also a 25-year-old woman in a gray dress who had not slept more than 4 hours and had no spare clothing. These two facts, she thought, were both equally true. She had decided, a long time ago, that the best way to handle impossible situations was to handle them one thing at a time. So she walked through the door that Edmund held open for her, into the cool morning air, and she put one foot in front of the other. That was enough, for now. That was enough. The carriage moved along the road toward town with the steadiness of a vehicle that had made this particular journey so many times that the horses no longer needed much guiding. Clara sat on the left side of the carriage. Edmund sat on the right. Fenwick rode up front. Between the two passengers inside, there was perhaps 3 feet of upholstered space, and both of them were very aware of it. They had been on the road for nearly 20 minutes before Edmund spoke. "I should tell you what to expect today," he said. "Please," Clara said. He told her. The meeting at the solicitor's office would take roughly an hour. The marriage document would be formally registered. A notice would be sent by legal post to Lord Percival's household, informing him that the condition of the will had been met. There would also be a brief announcement placed in the appropriate public record. None of this required anything from Clara except her presence and her signature. The solicitor, a man named Greer who handled the estate's legal matters, was fully briefed. He would not ask unnecessary questions. Clara nodded through all of this. She was listening, but she was also watching the landscape outside the window. The fields here were wide and flat, beginning to go brown with autumn, the hedgerows thick and still. It looked like country that had been farmed carefully for a very long time. "What happens when Lord Percival receives the notice?" she asked. Edmund's jaw tightened slightly. "He will not be pleased." "Will he challenge it?" "He will try to find grounds to challenge it," Edmund said. "Whether he succeeds is another matter. The marriage is legal. The timing is within the will's conditions. There is no valid argument against it. Unless he argues the marriage is not genuine," Clara said. The carriage was quiet for a moment. "Yes," Edmund said. "That is the one point he might raise." "And is there a standard?" she said. "For what counts as genuine? Legally?" "It is subjective," he said. "A court would look at evidence, whether we were seen together in public, whether we maintained a shared household, whether the conduct of the marriage was consistent with what a real marriage looks like." Clara thought about this. "So the next several months matter," she said. "Very much so." She looked at him. "Then I think we need to agree on what we are willing to do and what we are not," she said. "In public, so that neither of us is surprised." He looked at her carefully. "What are you proposing?" "I am proposing that we be clear," she said. "I will attend any event you require. I will be present, engaged, and convincing. I will not humiliate you or undercut the arrangement. But I will also not pretend to emotions I do not have, and I will not be put in situations where I am expected to perform beyond what we agreed." "That is exactly what I would want," he said. "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." Another silence. Then he said, "You are very precise." "I find it saves time," Clara said. Something moved across his face that might, in different circumstances, have become a smile. It did not quite get there, but it almost did. The solicitor's office was on the main street of Marlton, a town of moderate size with a market square and a great deal of grey stone. Mr. Greer was a small, efficient man in his 50s who shook both their hands and asked no unnecessary questions, exactly as Fenwick had promised. The papers were in order, the signatures were given, the registration was completed. It took 55 minutes. When they came back out onto the street, Clara blinked in the thin midday light. "That is done then," she said. "That part, yes," Edmund said. There was a pause. A woman on the other side of the street had stopped, and was looking at them with the particular attentiveness of someone who had recognized the Duke, and was now trying to place the woman beside him. Clara was suddenly aware that she was standing on a public street in a town she had never been to, next to a Duke she had known for less than 12 hours, wearing the same gray dress she had been wearing when she washed dishes the previous afternoon. The woman across the street began to move on, but she looked back once before she rounded the corner. "She will talk," Clara said. "Everyone will talk," Edmund said, without particular alarm. "That is unavoidable." "Then the sooner people see us together in a normal capacity," Clara said, "the better." "When is the first event where we would be expected?" He thought. "There is a dinner at Lord Hartley's house on Friday. 3 days from now. It is small, perhaps 15 people, but they are the right 15 people. If we attend, word will carry." "Then we should attend," Clara said. He looked at her. "You are not worried about it?" "I am practical about it," she said. "There is a difference." The ride back to Wexmore Hall was different from the ride into town. Something had shifted, very slightly, in the space between them. Not warmth exactly, but something like the first cautious layer of understanding. They had done something difficult together. They had done it without drama. They were both still there. When they arrived back at the estate, Edmund went to his study, and Clara went with Mrs. Potts to be introduced to the household staff. Mrs. Potts was a stout woman in her late 50s, with silver hair and the demeanor of someone who had managed this household for so long that the house itself obeyed her. She was not unfriendly, but she was watching. Clara could feel it. The staff were assembled in the main kitchen, all 14 of them. They ranged in age from Nell, the youngest, to an elderly gardener named Mr. Barker who had to be helped to stand. They stood in a row and looked at Clara with various combinations of curiosity, skepticism, and polite blankness. Edmund came in a moment after Clara. He stood at the front of the kitchen and introduced her in very few words, in the clear, direct manner he apparently used for most things. He said that she was the new Duchess of Wexmore. He said that she was to be treated accordingly. He said that anyone who had questions about the change in household could bring them to Mrs. Potts, who would bring them to him. Then he left. Clara remained. She looked at the 14 faces in front of her. "I am not going to tell you this is not unusual," she said, "because you all have eyes, and you know it is. I am not going to pretend I have always lived in a house like this, because I have not. What I will tell you is that I intend to be fair. I do not shout. I do not blame without reason. And if I ask you to do something, I will tell you why." She paused. "If any of you have a problem, bring it to me directly. I would rather hear it than guess at it." Nell, at the end of the row, was looking at her with something that was clearly relief. Mrs. Potts was looking at her with something slightly more complex. But she nodded. That was a start. What followed in the next 2 days was strange and busy in equal measure. A carriage was sent to Lady Harrington's estate to collect Clara's things, which arrived in a single modest trunk and a bag. A dressmaker was brought to the house at Edmund's quiet instruction, and Clara spent an uncomfortable 2 hours being measured and consulted, while she maintained that she did not need anything extravagant, and the dressmaker maintained, with iron gentle persistence, that certain basic items were required before Friday. Clara did not see Edmund much during those first 2 days. He was in his study for most of it, or in meetings with various land agents and tenants who apparently had matters that could not wait. Occasionally their paths crossed in a corridor or a doorway, and they acknowledged each other with the careful, non-intrusive politeness of two people who were being very deliberate about not being in each other's way. But on the second evening, she found him in the library. She had gone there looking for something to read, because the evenings were long in this house and she had not yet found how to fill them. She rounded the corner of the door and stopped. He was standing near the window with a book open in his hand, and he looked up when he heard her. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not realize you were here." "The library is yours to use," he said. "You do not need to apologize for it." She came in. She went to the nearest shelf and ran her eyes along the spines, looking for something familiar. Most of it was law and history and agricultural management, but there was one shelf near the back corner that had a different quality to it, more worn, more varied. She found a collection of essays by a writer she had read before, years ago, from a second-hand copy that had fallen apart before she finished it. She took it down. "Do you read much?" Edmund asked from across the room. "When I can afford to," she said, which has not often been. He looked at the book in her hand. He seemed about to say something, then stopped. She looked up. "What?" "That was my mother's copy," he said. "She used to argue with it, aloud, in that chair." He nodded toward a particular armchair near the window. She would read a sentence she disagreed with, and say it back in a different tone to show why the author was wrong. Clara looked at the chair. It was old and wide and slightly faded. She looked back at the book in her hands. "May I borrow it?" she said. "Yes," he said. She took it and sat, not in the chair his mother had used, but in the one beside it. She opened the book. He returned to his own reading. They sat in the library until the fire burned low, two people reading on opposite sides of a room, not speaking, not performing, simply occupying the same space because there was no particular reason not to. It was, Clara thought, putting the book down eventually and realizing the hour had gotten away from her, the most peaceful 2 hours she had spent in 3 years. She did not know what to do with that observation. She tucked it away, carefully, and went to bed. The dinner at Lord Hartley's house on Friday was the kind of event that looked informal and was not. Clara understood this before they arrived. She had grown up watching events like this from a respectful distance, close enough to learn the patterns, far enough to know she was not part of them. She wore the simplest of the dresses the dressmaker had delivered that morning, a deep green wool that was well cut and dignified without trying too hard. She had done her own hair. She was wearing the only good pair of shoes she owned, which were slightly worn at the heel in a way that would not be visible unless someone looked. No one would look. They arrived together in the Duke's carriage. Edmund handed her out at the door with the impersonal care of a man who had learned his social manners so thoroughly that they were automatic. She took his arm and they walked in together. The hallway of Lord Hartley's house was warm and bright. 15 people were arranged in a drawing room beyond, and the sound of conversation dropped by approximately a third when Edmund and Clara came through the door. Clara felt it. She had expected to. She looked straight ahead and kept her chin level. Edmund did not change his expression or his pace. He guided her forward and said, very quietly, beside her ear, "Third one on the left is Hartley. He is all right. The woman in blue beside him is his wife, who will decide what everyone else thinks of you before the first course. She values directness. Do not try to charm her." Clara processed this. What does she dislike? People who pretend to agree with her, he said. She already knows when they're doing it. Understood, Clara said. Lady Hartley was a tall woman in her late 50s with silver hair and a look of polished intelligence that she made no effort to conceal. She greeted Edmund with warmth that was genuine, and then turned to Clara with an assessment so swift and so complete that Clara felt it like a change in temperature. "So you are the famous Miss Voss," Lady Hartley said. "Or I suppose it is the Duchess of Wexmore now." "It is," Clara said, "though Miss Voss is what I am used to. I suspect it will take some time to adjust." Lady Hartley looked at her for a moment. "Most new duchesses I've met have adjusted remarkably quickly," she said, "often before the ink is dry." "I imagine the title is very attractive," Clara said. "I was attracted more by other aspects of the arrangement." There was the briefest pause, then Lady Hartley said, "Oh, interesting. Come and sit by me at dinner." It was, as tests went, a very efficient one. Clara had passed it and she knew she had. She also knew that the next 2 hours would be watched carefully, and she did not let herself forget it. But something unexpected happened over the course of that dinner. She was not performing. She was talking. Actually talking, because the people around her had things to say, and some of them were genuinely interesting things, and she found herself responding to them not with the careful management of someone running a social campaign, but with the honest engagement of someone who was interested in the conversation. She argued, politely but without backing down, with Lord Hartley's brother about the management of tenant farms. She asked the woman to her left about a piece of embroidery the woman mentioned, and the woman lit up entirely and talked for 10 minutes about a technique Clara had actually heard of but never tried. She answered questions about herself with the minimum information required and without apology. And Edmund watched her. She caught him doing it twice. Not staring, just watching, with the quiet attention of a person who has been given new information and is carefully incorporating it. On the ride home they were quiet for the first few minutes. Then he said, "You argued with Lord Hartley's brother about the crop rotation." "He was wrong," Clara said. "He is also rather used to being agreed with." "Then someone should have corrected him earlier." Another brief pause. "Lady Hartley asked me, before we left," Edmund said, "where I found you." Clara looked at him. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," he said. "That you were the daughter of a gentleman who had fallen on difficult times, and that you had managed rather better than the circumstances deserved." Clara was quiet for a moment. "That was kind of you," she said. "It was accurate," he said. She looked out the window. The night was very dark and the fields were invisible, just the occasional light of a farmhouse passing by. "She will support us, I think," Clara said. "Lady Hartley, if Percival makes trouble." "I think so too," Edmund said. "Good," she said. She heard him shift in the seat across from her. "Clara," he said, and then stopped. It was the first time he had used her name, just her name, without the miss. She was not sure if he had even noticed. "Yes," she said. "You did well tonight," he said. "Very well." She turned to look at him in the dark carriage. He was watching her with that expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that was not quite something but was not nothing either. "Thank you," she said. "So did you." He looked slightly startled by that, as if compliments directed at himself were not something he had much experience receiving. They arrived at Wexmore Hall a few minutes later. The footman opened the carriage door and they went inside, and the quiet routine of the house absorbed them again, and they said goodnight in the entrance hall and went in separate directions. But when Clara reached her room and sat down on the edge of the bed, she realized she was not tired. She was, instead, acutely awake in the way that comes after an evening where more has happened than appears on the surface. She had gone to that dinner as part of an arrangement. She had sat at that table as herself. She was not sure, when she thought about it carefully, where one ended and the other began. That, she thought, lying back and looking at the dark ceiling, was something worth paying attention to. She was not going to ignore it. She was not going to be foolish about it, but she was not going to pretend she had not noticed. She had agreed to be honest, with him, and apparently also with herself. She closed her eyes. Outside, a wind was moving through the oak trees at the end of the long drive, and the house was very quiet, and somewhere in a room 2 floors below, a man who was not what she had expected was sitting alone with his papers and his books and his very long list of things that needed to be managed. She thought, "He said my name." She thought, "Go to sleep, Clara." She did. 3 weeks after the dinner at Hartley's, the letter arrived. Clara was in the library when Fenwick brought it to her. He came in without his usual knock, which told her something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. "There is a communication from Lord Percival's solicitor," he said. She set down her book. He placed the letter on the table in front of her. She picked it up and read it. It was 2 pages long, written in the careful, over-measured language of a legal challenge that was not yet a legal challenge but wanted to be clearly understood as one. The gist of it was simple. Lord Percival did not accept that the marriage between the Duke and Miss Clara Voss was legitimate. He cited 3 grounds: the speed of the arrangement, the difference in social standing, and the testimony of a witness. The witness was described only as a member of the domestic staff at the estate of a third party who claimed to have overheard a negotiation between the Duke's solicitor and Miss Voss, in which the marriage was described as a business arrangement and a temporary measure. Clara read it twice. She set it down. Fenwick was watching her carefully. "He has a witness," she said. "The description suggests someone from Lady Harrington's household," Fenwick said. "Possibly the footman who was present when I arrived that night. He was awake when I came in. I am not certain what he may have heard, or what he has been paid to claim he heard," Clara said. Fenwick nodded. "That is also possible." She stood up. "Where is Edmund?" "In his study. He has already received a copy." She went to the study. He was standing when she came in, which told her he had been pacing. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at the letter in her hand. "You read it," he said. "Yes." Fenwick should not have. "This concerns me directly," Clara said. "It would have been worse to find out later." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded once in acknowledgement. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Fight it," he said immediately. "There is no valid legal argument here. The marriage is real. It was conducted lawfully. The timing met the will's conditions. The witness is the problem," she said. "The witness can be challenged in court. Fenwick believes the testimony would not hold under proper examination." "Fenwick may be right," Clara said, "but Percival does not need to win. He only needs to make the process long and expensive and public enough that you feel it." Edmund was quiet for a moment. She could see that he had already thought of this. "What are you suggesting?" he said. "I am not suggesting we give in," Clara said. "I am suggesting we make it harder for him." She sat down in the chair across from the desk. "The witness claims to have heard a private negotiation. What a court will need to decide is whether that conversation means the marriage was false. The way to make that harder for him is to make the marriage look less like a negotiation and more like a reality." "We have been doing that," Edmund said. "We have been doing it carefully," she said. "Which is appropriate, but perhaps we need to do it more visibly." She paused. "There is a public concert at the Assembly Hall in Marlton in 2 weeks. There is also the opening of the new reading room at the county library, which several people of standing have been invited to attend. And there is Lady Hartley's autumn gathering the week after that." Edmund looked at her. "I have been paying attention," she said, "to which events matter, and which people attend them, and what those people will say afterward." He sat down. He put both hands flat on the desk and looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. It was not quite gratitude, and it was not quite surprise. It was something between the two. The look of a person who has been carrying a heavy thing, and has just had someone step in beside them and take hold of the other handle. "You have been thinking about this," he said. "For several days," she said. "I was not sure whether to raise it, because I did not want to make this feel like a performance. But now there is a letter with a witness, and thinking about it quietly is not enough." "No," he said, "it is not." He was looking at her in that careful, attentive way of his. "May I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. When you agreed to this arrangement," he said, "did you believe it would stay simple?" She thought about this honestly. "I thought it would be manageable," she said. "I did not think anything would stay simple. Things generally do not." He nodded. "No," he said, "they do not." He picked up a pen. "I will draft a response to Percival's solicitor today. I will have Fenwick arrange the concert tickets and the library invitation. And I will write to Lady Hartley." "Write to her yourself," Clara said. "Not through Fenwick. She will notice the difference." He looked up. "You have thought about this down to the letters I should write." "I have thought about what a man fighting to keep his home would do," Clara said. "And whether the man in front of me is doing all of those things." He held her gaze for a moment. "I am trying to," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why I came to tell you what I had thought." She stood up. She smoothed her skirt. "What was Percival like?" she asked. "Before all of this, when you were children." Edmund was quiet for a moment. "He was clever," he said. "He is still clever. He is the kind of person who studies weakness rather than strength. He has always believed this estate should have been managed differently, and he has always been waiting for the opportunity to say so. Does he know anything about managing an estate? Enough to convince people who do not know better." "And the people who do know better," Clara said. "The tenants, the agents, the people whose livelihoods depend on this land. What do they think of you?" Something shifted in his face. It was not a comfortable shift. "Some of them," he said slowly, "probably think I am very like my father. which is not entirely a compliment. Then perhaps, Clara said, one of the things we should do in the next few weeks is make sure the right people see that you are not. He looked at her for a long time. You have changed the scope of this considerably, he said. Only because you asked me to help make the marriage look real, she said. A real marriage is two people working together on the same problem. A very brief pause. Yes, he said quietly. It is. She went back to the library. But she did not pick up her book. She sat for a long time with her hands in her lap, looking at the fire. She had gone into that study to share a plan. She had come out having said something that was technically about strategy, and was also, she realized now, about something else entirely. A real marriage is two people working together on the same problem. She had meant it as a tactical observation. She was not sure, sitting in the library with the fire warm on her face and the house quiet around her, that it had only been that. She was not alarmed by this. She was honest enough with herself to know that something had been growing in the weeks since the chapel, slowly and without invitation, the way certain plants grow in stone walls, finding no particular soil but finding a way regardless. She was also practical enough to know that noticing a thing and acting on it were two different decisions. She had made one promise to herself when she came into this arrangement. She would not lose herself in it. She would not become someone different because the house was large and the man was complicated and the circumstances were unusual. She would remain exactly who she had been in the kitchen sitting room at 1 a.m, with her hands in her lap and her eyes clear and her conditions already formed. She thought she was still that person. She thought she was also, perhaps, a person who had started to care whether the Duke of Wexmoor kept his estate, and whether he ate dinner, and whether he slept. She picked up her book. She tried very hard to read. The concert at Marlton's Assembly Hall was attended by most of the county's notable families, and Clara and Edmund sat together in the 4th row and were looked at from every angle for the entirety of the first half. Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap and listened to the music and kept her expression composed and her back straight and answered questions during the interval with the pleasant directness that she had found worked best in these settings. Edmund sat beside her with his shoulder almost touching hers, which was closer than they usually sat, and Clara understood it was deliberate and did not move away. A woman named Mrs. Dunmore, who managed to be in every conversation somehow, appeared at Clara's elbow during the interval and asked, with a smile that was sharp at the edges, how the newlyweds were settling in. Very well, Clara said pleasantly. The library at Wexmoor Hall is particularly good. I have been working through a set of essays that have kept me arguing with the author for 2 weeks. Mrs. Dunmore blinked. She had expected something more conventional. And the Duke, she said, recovering. He is a great reader himself? He is, Clara said, though his taste runs to legal texts and agricultural management, which I find admirable if not always thrilling at bedtime. There was a pause. Mrs. Dunmore looked briefly as though she was not sure what to do with that sentence. Edmund, who was standing 2 feet away and had heard every word, said nothing, but he turned his head very slightly in her direction, and she could see, at the edge of his expression, the very precise ghost of amusement. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but Clara caught it, and it sat with her for the rest of the evening like a small, warm thing that she was being careful not to examine too directly. The library opening was quieter. There were perhaps 20 people. Edmund spoke briefly and well, in the way he had of saying exactly what was required and nothing more. Clara stood beside him and shook hands and listened and noticed, not for the first time, that when he spoke about the county and its people, something different came into his voice. Not sentiment, something closer to responsibility, a weight he carried not as a burden but as a fact. She thought, he actually cares about this. She thought, I am not sure I knew that until now. And then the week of Lady Hartley's autumn gathering arrived. It was larger than the dinner at Hartley's house. 30 people, a formal supper, and what Edmund described as the annual tradition of everyone attempting to say something memorable, and most of them failing. Clara wore a dress that the dressmaker had delivered the previous week, a dark blue that was simple in cut and better than anything she had ever owned before, and she had pinned her hair herself in a way she had spent the previous evening practicing. She did not tell anyone she had practiced. When she came down the stairs that evening and Edmund was waiting in the entrance hall, he looked up. He looked at her for a moment. You look well, he said. Thank you, she said. So do you. They went out to the carriage. Inside, on the way to the Hartley estate, there was a quality to the silence between them that was different from the silences of the early weeks. Those silences had been careful, navigated. This one was simply quiet, the way the silence between two people can be when they are comfortable, and do not feel the need to fill it. Clara noticed it. She did not comment on it. But she was thinking about it when they arrived, and she was still thinking about it when they went inside, and she was halfway through a conversation with Lady Hartley about the state of the local roads when she caught Edmund looking at her from across the room with that expression she had come to know, and she thought very clearly and without warning, "I trust this man." Not in the way she trusted the document that was held by Mr. Webb in Marlton, not the way she trusted a contract. In the way you trust a person. In the way that happens quietly and without your permission, over dinners and libraries and evening silences, when you have been paying attention without meaning to and something has accumulated. She finished the conversation with Lady Hartley. She went to find Edmund at the far end of the room. He turned when she approached. "All right?" he said, quietly, just to her. "Yes," she said. "Very all right." And she was. Lord Percival arrived at Wexmore Hall on a Tuesday morning without warning. Clara was in the morning room when she heard the carriage on the drive, and she moved to the window before she had consciously decided to. She saw the unfamiliar crest on the door. She saw the man who stepped out, tall and lean, with carefully arranged hair and a coat that was very good, and worn with great awareness of the fact. He stood for a moment on the gravel and looked up at the house with an expression that was not quite hunger, and was not quite contempt, but was somewhere between the two. She had never met Lord Percival. She had not needed to, until now. But she had heard enough from Edmund and from Fenwick to have formed a picture, and the man standing on the gravel drive matched it closely enough that she felt a small, cold alertness move through her. She went to find Edmund. He was already coming down the corridor toward the entrance hall. He must have been told the moment the carriage was spotted from the gatehouse. "Percival," she said. "Yes," he said. His voice was flat and controlled. "You are not expecting him today," she said. "No. Do you want me present or not?" she asked. He looked at her. The question had come quickly and clearly, exactly as she had meant it. She was not going to insert herself, but she was not going to disappear either, and she needed to know which was more useful. "Present," he said. "In the room, but not at the front of it. Let me handle the conversation. But I want you there." She nodded. They went to the entrance hall together. Percival came in when the door was opened, and he stopped for a moment when he saw both of them waiting. It was a small thing, that pause, but Clara noticed it. She thought he had expected to find Edmund alone, or to be made to wait, and finding them both there and ready had disrupted whatever opening he had planned. "Edmund," Percival said. His voice was smooth and warm in the way that surfaces can be warm when the material is very cold underneath. "Percival," Edmund said. Percival's eyes moved to Clara. He looked at her with the same careful assessment she had seen in Lady Hartley's eyes at the first dinner, except that Lady Hartley's assessment had been honest, and this one was a search for weakness. "And this must be the new Duchess," Percival said. He smiled. It was technically a smile. "I have heard so much about you, Miss Voss." "It is the Duchess of Wexmore," Edmund said quietly, "not Miss Voss." A small pause. Percival redirected his smile without adjusting it. "Of course," he said. "Forgive me." Clara said nothing. She simply looked at him with the same clear, direct attention she gave to most things. They went to the sitting room. Tea was brought. Clara sat in the chair to Edmund's right and held her cup and listened. Percival opened with pleasantries, which he was very good at, and which went nowhere because Edmund refused to be drawn into them. Then Percival moved to what he actually came to say, which was this. He understood the marriage had been registered, he understood the deadline of the will had been technically met, and he did not want any difficulty between them as a family. He simply wanted to be assured, in a spirit of goodwill, that there would be full transparency about the management of the estate going forward. Clara watched Edmund hear this. She watched him process the layers of it, the false warmth, the implied threat underneath the request for transparency, the framing of himself as the reasonable party. "The estate is managed as it has always been managed," Edmund said. "If you have concerns about the will's terms being met, you have legal recourse. If you are here for a family conversation, you are welcome to tea, and nothing more." Percival's smile did not change, but something in his eyes did. "I understand you have a witness," Clara said. Both men turned to look at her. She said it very calmly, the way she might observe that it looked like rain. "I beg your pardon?" Percival said. "Your solicitor's letter mentioned a witness," she said. "Someone who claims to have heard a private conversation about the nature of our arrangement. I am curious what that person told you." Percival looked at her carefully. "I am not sure this is the appropriate. It involves me directly," Clara said. "I think it is entirely appropriate. She set her cup down on the saucer with a small, precise click. I am asking because I would like to understand what you believe that witness heard, and whether it matches what actually occurred. People who overhear conversations frequently misunderstand them. Partial information is unreliable. There was a silence. Percival looked at her for a long moment. She could see him recalibrating, trying to decide what kind of person she was, what her angle was, whether she was more of a complication than he had planned for. I am sure any misunderstandings can be resolved appropriately, he said, with the tone of a person retreating gracefully. I am sure they can, Clara said pleasantly. We would be happy to cooperate with any proper legal examination of the matter. In the meantime, we are content to let the public evidence speak for itself. People in this county have had several weeks now to observe the marriage. Lady Hartley, Lord Dunmore, Mr. Greer. I believe their impressions are fairly clear. Another silence. Percival looked at Edmund. Edmund looked back at him with absolute stillness. I came in a spirit of goodwill, Percival said. You are welcome to leave in one, Edmund said. Percival stood. He was controlled about it, which Clara thought probably cost him something. He said his farewells with the same smooth warmth he had arrived with, and he shook Edmund's hand, and he gave Clara a nod that was just barely respectful enough, and then he left. The carriage moved back down the gravel drive. The house was very quiet. Clara picked up her tea, which had gone cold, and held it anyway. After a moment, Edmund said, You mentioned the witness. Yes, she said. I had decided not to raise it directly, he said. I know, she said, but I thought it was better to show him we are not afraid of it. A person who is afraid of a witness does not name it in conversation. He looked at her for a long time. You are very good at this, he said. She put down the cold cup. I have been poor, she said simply. When you have nothing to lose, you learn quickly which things are worth being afraid of. A man with a witness, who may or may not hold up in court, is not one of them. He was quiet. She thought perhaps she had said too much. She was about to stand up when he spoke. I am sorry, he said, for what that time was like, for what it cost you. The words were very quiet, and she understood, from the way he said them, that he was not performing sympathy. He was simply saying what was true. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. She meant it completely. The weeks after Percival's visit had a different quality to them than the weeks before. Something had been settled, not entirely, not permanently, but enough. The legal challenge from Percival's solicitor went quiet, at least for now. The witnesses whose names had been mentioned in the letter turned out to be less reliable under formal inquiry than Percival had apparently believed, and Fenwick reported this news with the contained satisfaction of a man who has been proved correct. The county continued to observe the marriage, as counties do, but the observation became less sharp-edged. People had seen them at enough events now. They had heard enough from enough reliable sources. Lady Hartley, in particular, had apparently told several people that the new Duchess was a woman of considerable good sense, which in Lady Hartley's vocabulary was the highest form of praise she offered. Clara moved through the autumn days with a kind of steadiness she had not felt in years. It was not happiness exactly. It was more like the feeling of solid ground after a long time of walking on things that shifted. She ran the household with Mrs. Potts, and the two of them had arrived at a working relationship that was mutually respectful and occasionally warm. Clara had caught on quickly that Mrs. Potts's main concern was not status or hierarchy but order. She wanted the house to run well, and she wanted to be trusted to know how. And once Clara had made it clear that she had no interest in undermining that trust, things had become considerably easier. Nell had attached herself to Clara with the quiet devotion of someone who had been waiting for a person to look at her as though she existed. Clara found her useful and honest, and occasionally amusing, and she made a point of telling her when she had done something well. She worked through the library steadily. Edmund had started leaving books on the breakfast table, not always with comment, sometimes just placed there as a fact. Once he left a slim volume on the history of the county's farming practices with a note that said simply, "Thought you might find this relevant." She read it in 2 evenings and left it back on the table with 3 specific pages marked. He read her notes, she could tell, because the next morning he started a sentence at breakfast about the drainage problem on the North Fields and then stopped himself. "Go on," she said, without looking up from her toast. He looked at her across the table. "The 3rd marked page," she said. "You were going to say something about the 3rd marked page." He said something about the 3rd marked page. They talked about it for 20 minutes and were late for their respective mornings. These were the details, she thought. These were the things that nobody who wrote about marriages wrote about. Not the grand moments, not the declarations, but the accumulated texture of days, knowing how a person takes their tea, knowing when they were tired and when they were simply quiet, knowing the exact quality of the silence that meant they were working through something difficult versus the silence that meant they were simply content. She knew these things about Edmund now. She was not entirely sure when she had learned them, but they were there, solidly, in the way that things are when you have been paying genuine attention. One morning in November, she found him at the window of his study staring out at the garden with the very particular stillness of a person who is not seeing what they are looking at. She knocked on the open door. He turned. "The agent from the Northern Farms is coming this afternoon," she said. "I thought you might want to know that I spoke with one of the tenants yesterday at the market, the Barrows family. Their roof has been needing repair since spring." He looked at her. "How do you know the Barrows?" "I asked Mrs. Potts to tell me which families on the estate were managing and which were not," she said. "She gave me a list. I have been going through it." He said nothing for a moment. "You have been going through the list of tenant families," he said. "I did not think you would object," she said. "If you do, tell me." "I do not object," he said carefully. "I am trying to understand why you did it." She thought about this for a moment. "Because I live here," she said. "And the people on those farms are not abstractions. They are the reason this estate functions. And if someone is going to know their situations, it seemed better for it to be someone who has time to go to the market." He looked at her for a very long time. "The Barrows," he said finally. "How bad is the roof?" "Needs replacing before winter. It has been leaking into the grain storage." "I will have it looked at this week," he said. She nodded. She was about to go when he said, "Clara." She stopped. He was still looking at her with that expression she had never quite been able to name. She had thought of it many times, in the evenings, trying to classify it. It was not gratitude exactly. It was not admiration exactly. It was something that was both of those things but quieter, something more like recognition. "Thank you," he said, "for thinking of them." She stood in the doorway for a moment. "They are yours," she said. "Which means for now they are also mine." She went back down the corridor. She stood for a moment at the window at the end of the hall and looked out at the grounds. The trees had lost most of their leaves now. The garden was brown and still. The sky was a pale, washed gray. She thought about the document held by Mr. Webb in Marlton. She thought about the annulment timeline written clearly into it. She thought about the passage to the continent, and the sum of money, and the clean, simple end of the arrangement that was coming, by the terms she herself had insisted upon. She thought, "I wrote those terms because I was protecting myself." She thought, "I am not sure they protect the right things anymore." She did not do anything with this thought. She was not ready to. She put it carefully aside and went to find Nell, because the linen cupboard needed reorganizing, and it was the kind of task that required full attention and left no room for anything else. But that evening, sitting in the library, she noticed that the armchair she always chose was the one beside the window, and that Edmund's preferred chair was the one to its left, and that at some point in the past several weeks, without either of them announcing it or deciding it, this had become where they sat, together in the evenings, reading, occasionally talking, sometimes arguing about something in a book, once debating whether the estate's east gate needed replacing or merely repairing, which went on for 45 minutes and ended with neither of them having changed their position, but both of them having had the better part of a pleasant evening. She thought, "This is what I asked for. Dignity, freedom, truth." She thought, "I have all three." She thought, and yet, she opened her book. The fire crackled. On the other side of the room, Edmund turned a page. The house was very quiet around them, and very warm, and November pressed against the windows, and neither of them said a word. And it was enough, and it was also not quite enough, and Clara held both of those things at once and told herself that she was not afraid of things that had no name yet. She was not. But she was paying attention. She was always paying attention. The end of the arrangement arrived in the way that inevitable things often do, not all at once, but preceded by a series of smaller moments that were trying, if you were paying attention, to tell you something. Fenwick came to Clara on a gray December morning and told her, with the careful neutrality of a man who was doing his professional duty and trying not to show that he had feelings about it, that the 6-month term was approaching, that the paperwork for the annulment could be prepared at her request, that the funds were in order and the arrangements for travel were hers to make whenever she chose. Clara thanked him. She sat with the information for 3 days. During those 3 days, life at Wexmore Hall continued exactly as it had. The Barrows' roof had been repaired and the tenants had sent a small package of preserves to the house in thanks, which Clara had put on the kitchen table and mentioned to Edmund at dinner, and he had eaten a jar of the plum jam over the following week with a quiet satisfaction that he did not comment on but that was visible. The northern fields had been assessed and a drainage plan had been commissioned. Lady Hartley had sent a letter asking if Clara might come to tea in the new year. Life had texture now, real texture, accumulated through months of real days. On the third evening after Fenwick's visit, Clara did not go to the library. She went instead to the small sitting room at the back of the house that looked out onto the garden. She sat by the dark window with a cup of tea she did not drink, and looked at the winter garden and the bare trees and the cold sky, and she thought about what she was going to do. She thought about it honestly. That was what she had always been, honest. She thought about the woman who had walked into Edmund's study at 2 in the morning with her conditions already formed. She thought about that woman's priorities. Freedom, dignity, truth. She thought about whether those priorities had changed. They had not. But what freedom meant to her had changed. What she wanted it for had changed. She thought about the months in this house. The breakfast table in the library and the arguments about drainage and the tenant families and Nell and Mrs. Potts and the gray October morning when she had taken Edmund's arm outside the chapel and felt, not fear, but the unexpected sensation of not being entirely alone. She thought about a man who had agreed to every condition she had laid down, without flinching, and who had kept every one of them since. She thought about the way he said her name. She stood up. She went to find him. He was in the library. Of course he was. He was in the chair to the left of the window, with a book open, and the fire was going, and he looked up when she came in. She did not sit down. She stood in the middle of the room. In her hand were the annulment papers that Fenwick had left with her 3 days ago. She held them out toward him so he could see what they were. He looked at the papers. He looked at her. He did not say anything. He was waiting for her to speak, the way he always waited, giving her space and not filling it, which was one of the things she had come to know about him and to trust. "I would like to renegotiate," she said. The room was very quiet. He stood up from the chair. He was looking at her with that expression she had been trying to name since October, and she understood it now. She understood it completely, because she was quite certain it matched something in her own face. "Same solicitor?" he said. "Mine," she said. "Obviously." Something moved across his face then, real and unguarded, a thing she had not seen from him before in full, without the careful covering of composure over the top of it. It was not a grand expression. It was quiet and deep and entirely his own. He crossed the room toward her. She held her ground. When he reached her, he took the annulment papers from her hand and set them on the side table without looking at them, and then he stood in front of her, and the fire was warm behind him, and the room was very still. "What are the new terms?" he said. "No timeline," she said. "No end date. No passage to the continent, and no pretending that what has happened in this house over the past 6 months has only been an arrangement." He looked at her for a long moment. "Agreed," he said. "You did not think about it," she said. "I have been thinking about it for 3 months," he said. "I was waiting." She looked at him. "For what?" "For you to decide," he said. "It needed to be your decision, not mine." She thought about this. She thought about a man who, at 2 in the morning with everything at stake, had sat across a desk and agreed to every condition she set, not because it was convenient, but because he had understood, even then, that her choosing freely was the only version of this that meant anything. She thought, this is the kind of person who keeps their word. She thought, this is the kind of person I would choose. "Then I have decided," she said. He put out his hand. She took it. Not the way she had taken it in the chapel, with the careful formality of 2 strangers performing a ceremony. She took it the way you take the hand of a person you know, the person who leaves books on your breakfast table and listens when you argue with dead authors and checks that you are all right with no performance behind the question. They stood in the library with the fire and the books and the December dark pressing against the windows, and nothing dramatic happened, which was exactly right, because what was real between them had never been dramatic. It had been steady and careful and built slowly out of honest days. "I should tell you something," Clara said. "All right," he said. "The day Fenwick came to Lady Harrington's," she said, "I almost said no, before I agreed to meet you. I nearly told him we had never spoken and sent him away." He looked at her. "What changed your mind?" She thought about it. "He said you keep your word," she said, "that in 20 years he had never seen you break a promise made in good faith." She paused. "I decided that was worth investigating." He was quiet for a moment. "And what did you find?" he said. "That Fenwick was right," she said. "He usually is, apparently." He looked at her then, in a way she thought she would remember for a very long time. Not the look of a man getting what he wanted. The look of a man who has been given something he was not entirely sure he had earned. "I have not been easy to know," he said. "No," she agreed. "Neither have I." A brief pause. "We are fairly well matched then," he said. She almost smiled. She had been managing not to smile fully at Edmund for approximately 4 months, and she was not about to stop now. "We are," she said. He kept hold of her hand. Neither of them said anything else for a while. There was nothing that needed to be said. The house was quiet. The fire was warm. Outside, the winter night was settled over the grounds, and the oak trees and the long drive and the fields beyond, and somewhere in the distance a wind was moving through the bare branches the way it had on the very first morning, the morning after the chapel, when she had stood in the entrance hall of Wexmore Hall and thought, "This is where I am now." She was still here. She had chosen to be. That, she thought, was the difference between the first morning and this one. The first morning she had been here because the terms said so. This evening she was here because she had looked at the papers that said she could leave, and she had carried them in her hand to the library, and she had put them on the side table, and she had said no, not yet, not for a long time, perhaps not at all. There was no ceremony for it, no vicar and no register, no witnesses in a cold chapel. Just a woman who had spent 3 years surviving carefully, standing in a warm room with a man who had kept every promise he had made to her, deciding, freely and with full knowledge, that she was staying. She had asked him for dignity. He had given it. She had asked for freedom. He had given that too, more than she had expected, including the freedom to leave. She had asked for truth. And the truth, she thought, looking at him, was this. She had come in with conditions, and she was staying without them, not because she had lost herself, but because she had found something she had not budgeted for, something she had not known to ask for in the list she had laid on his desk at 2 in the morning. A person who looked at her like she was real. A person who waited. A person who said, "It needs to be your decision." She thought, "I did not know to ask for that." She thought, "I know now." Edmund turned slightly toward the window, and she turned with him, and they stood together and looked out at the dark December garden and the bare trees and the cold, clear sky with its first pale stars appearing. "Fenwick will be pleased," Edmund said. "He will be insufferably pleased," Clara said. "He will say nothing, and his face will say everything." "For weeks," Edmund agreed. "Months," she said. He turned to look at her, and she looked back at him, and neither of them looked away. Outside, the wind moved through the oak trees at the end of the long drive, and the house stood solid and warm around them, and the stars came out one by one over the winter fields, and the night settled in for good. And that was how it ended, and also, quietly and without announcement, how it began.